Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm joined again by Jen. Hey Jen, welcome back again.
Hi, I'm super happy to be here today with my friend Sarah.
Yes. So today we're joined by Sarah Cho, and you introduced me to Sarah because you had crossed paths with Sarah on LinkedIn, and then you got to meet in real life and in person, and just really connected.
Yeah, she's great. I liked one of her posts on LinkedIn. It was really resonated with me. And then I ran into her at the Women in Insurance conference in March. We exchanged phone numbers and have been texting about our similar kids and lives ever since.
Yeah, and so Sarah's a senior claims consultant at Woodruff Sawyer, but she's is a lawyer by trade, and started a career out in claims, and now went over to the broker side. And you and Sarah kind of shared a lot of similar parallel life experiences, as well as similar professional experiences as well. And she's just a dynamic, super interesting individual, and I'm super excited to have her on. So with that, let's bring her in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Megan Henry.
Good afternoon, Sarah. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm so happy to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Meghan and Jenn. It's such a pleasure to be here.
So I have to say, Jen kind of introduced me to you because I forgot, where did you guys meet? Or did you meet on LinkedIn? I'm forgetting now.
I feel like Jen and I just have seen each other on LinkedIn, and then we had the great pleasure of meeting each other in person in March of this last year at the Women in Leadership at the Executive Summit up in Mohegan Sun, Connecticut.
Yes.
And we basically gravitated towards each other because we have so many similarities in our story.
I can see why. I mean, so just for our listeners to know, like when I think Jen had mentioned you, and I think I had seen you separately on LinkedIn. And then when I got on the phone with you, and after I got off, and you had to go because we didn't even talk about the podcast. We talked about all the things, and not even this podcast. And I messaged Jen after. I'm like, she's awesome. Like I can't wait to record with her.
Thank you.
And I want to dive into a little bit about your and Jen's similarities, and I'm sure Jen will bring it up as well. But I want to start off though by talking about how, as we dive into this with every guest in this podcast, so this is of no surprise to anyone who listens, about your backstory and how you got where you are, because your journey, much like every other guest, is very unique and has its own bobs and weaves. And I asked this of all my guests because I love hearing about everyone's stories, and because you just learn stuff along the way, and it kind of builds on your professional life, and these experiences that you have just kind of weave where you are now. But to start off, you're a lawyer by trade, right? So what pushed you to go to law school? Was it something that you had planned on doing, or you fell into doing, you were pressured to do? Like, how was your path to law school?
So I'll start at kind of like the beginning. Like my parents came from South Korea in like the 1970s. They owned dry cleaners. I grew up in New Jersey. I still am in New Jersey, and I have two older brothers. So I grew up kind of like always fighting with them and learning how to get what I needed to, but also grew up with parents who are very much like, you are an Asian female, you don't say a word. Like you stay there and you say, yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. And I went to Boston University and studied international relations and French. And God put this feeling in my heart to be like, go to West Africa and be a human rights attorney, right, for those who are in need. And so I had this like seed planted in me when I was in college to apply for law school, and taking the LSATs is no joke. Like, just the whole process of getting into law school is arduous. And I don't think I would have done it unless I had that like desire and passion. And I ended up going to law school. Then my hopes of being a human rights attorney quickly faltered because I passed the New Jersey bar on the first time. The New York bar, however, I missed by 6 points. And I was like, oh, this is so embarrassing. Like all my friends are going out drinking, celebrating their law school, their bar exam passing. And I'm here like, now I have to study again. And I did pass the second time. And then I was like, oh my God, I have like $200,000 in school loans. Like, I don't think I can be a human rights attorney. They don't make any money. So at the time I had a friend who did a doc review job with me, and he got into AIG as a claims adjuster. And he was like, there's spots available. You want to try? I said, sure. So I fell into insurance. I didn't know what I was doing. Like I had to ask my manager, is it okay if I contact defense counsel? And she looked at me and she's like, it's always okay to contact defense counsel. Like that's how little I knew about insurance. And luckily AIG is a place where, they throw you in and you just learn. So I started my insurance career that way. And it was like right out of law school. So I find myself a little fortunate for having like not have to practice. I just went straight into claims. But no, it was not like a lifelong dream at all. It was more like it was 2008. The recession happened and get a job. Start paying bills.
It's so funny because we do talk about how much our lives are similar, and the same thing happened to me. I had the most hours for public service in my graduating law school class. I thought I was going to be like a public interest attorney, and then I graduated in 2008, and I ended up going into insurance because
that's so funny.
So we really do have completely similar stories.
Parallel lives.
Lives.
And I actually had somewhat similar path, although I didn't go into insurance, but I did graduate in 2007 and there were 0 job opportunities. I had thought I was going to go into like commercial real estate, and that was not an option at that time.
Everything was at the bottom.
Yes. And the firm I had summered at was not taking on new hires. So that was a dead end there. You know how you put so many eggs in that basket? You're like, oh, I'll summer at this job and that'll be my job afterwards. And that was what was the idea. And then they had a turn themselves, so they couldn't take on new associates. And I then too went into the doc review environment, which itself was the most humbling experience of my life. Like, if you ever want to feel lesser than, just embark in some pharmaceutical doc review projects, and you will feel really good about yourself.
Yeah, I think I made like $20 an hour.
Yes,
starting out of law school, and I was like, the math doesn't add, the mathing is nothing.
It was not, but there was nothing at the time. It was, there was so many of my graduating class were there right with me. And it really, I don't know what your experience was like, but mine was like, we were on like an office building in Philly. They had like a lower floor that probably was just open office space that they just set up rooms and lines of computers. And,
you clock in, you clock out.
Yes. And like they had, the senior attorneys, the staff attorneys who were like basically our prison guards, who would like walk around and make sure we kept clicking. You weren't allowed on your phone. No talking.
No.
Like
yeah,
you could listen to music on your headphones.
There were monitors like going around, and like people got fired, like for not, because I think they also measured the click strokes and like to see if you were actually working.
Yes, it was the most humble. I was like, I am an attorney. I really think I am an attorney, but it does not feel like I'm an attorney right now. As I'm like, doing, you had to redact whatever, there was key words that you had to redact. I don't know. Oh my, it was terrible, but it was comforting when I saw so much of my graduating class there, so I didn't feel as much of a loser. Because I wasn't the only one.
I felt happy because I was like, there were like hundreds of applicants for this one, and it wasn't quite doc review. It was like building a tool, a research tool. So like they were like a select number, and I was like, oh, this is great. But then when we started the job, I was like, wow, like, is this what life is? Like, I just didn't expect it,
Yeah. Oh, but so I made it out. You made it out. But yeah, that's how, like, I kind of, ended up in litigation because I was like, I have to get out of this situation, because there are a lot of very senior people who were doing the same job, and I was like, I do not want that to be my future. I need to do more. But then that's how I ended up in litigation too, because it was just what was out there and what was hiring at that time.
Yeah. And not knocking like doc review as a profession. Like I have a friend who speaks Thai and Japanese, and she's killing it. Like, the documents that she's reading, it's like you get paid insane amount of money. So like,
yeah. I mean, I had colleagues and classmates who continued on, and now like they chair their big firm departments for, these giant doc review projects. So like there's a definite career path that I just don't think I was on that path.
Right.
I think I was on the click forever path if I so anyway, you end up in insurance. So what, well, first of all, like how did your parents feel about your path? Were they like super proud that you were taking this path and, you were making waves where you were, or did you get some resistance?
So my parents, my dad is trained as an architect engineer. Like he used to build ships in South Korea.
Cool.
And he has an interesting story. So the company in Korea sent him to New York to kind of work in the New York office. And he ended up, his English was so bad. He would come home every day and tell my mom, I'm going to get fired. Like, and she's like, why would they spend all this money to fly, to move you to New York just to fire you? So she was like his rock. But there was a point in his, like a couple years in, where the person who his subordinate became his boss. And he was like, I'm out. It was just so, I think, embarrassing to him. He was like, I need to just do my own thing. And in the 1980s, a lot of South Koreans were opening up dry cleaners. And so he had a lot of friends who had dry cleaners, and he was like, how do I do this? Like, what's it like? How much money do you make? And he's always been an entrepreneur. So he just left the corporate world and like did that for basically until, his retirement almost. And when he saw that I got into AIG, at the time it was Chartis. It was going through the name change and everything. But he was like, you know what, Sarah, like the corporate world might be frustrating at times, but there's a lot of security. Like you can, contribute to 401k. And that's, I think he didn't regret leaving the corporate world, but I think his thought was, your life will be easier when you get older and, you have some retirement savings. Because my parents, like, they contributed and got Social Security, but they didn't necessarily have a retirement plan. So he was happy. He's like, you got to start. I started, at AIG as a claims analyst too, I think, and making like $60,000, right? Like back then.
Yeah.
And he was like, that's great. It's something. You can just move up from there. So like, and I was like, okay, like this is great. Like, just living in New York and being part of that scene in your 20s was great. Like, yeah, I met my friends in the industry that way.
Yeah. I mean, I remember even like when I graduated college or a little bit after college, I was like looking for jobs, and like I was looking for jobs in New York. And I remember being so excited about the possibility. Of course, I didn't really, I think the jobs I was looking at were making even less than that. And I didn't really figure out how I would be able to live on such salary.
Right.
So anyway, though, you start out at Chubb, but then at some point you took a leave to take care of your kids, right?
Yeah. So I started out at actually AIG, and then I moved to ACE North American Claims. Mm-hmm. It was, in 2012 I had moved, and so the merger hadn't happened yet, and it was maybe two and a half years into ACE that I was pregnant with my first. I was 30. I knew I wanted to have kids. My husband was like, we can wait 5 years. I'm like, oh no, these ovaries are speaking to me. Like, we need to have kids now. So, so we, so I was 30 with Colette, and she, like, I was nursing, which in and of itself is a full-time job. She had like severe eczema. She was like a medically, she was very needy in terms of like her needs. And so I remember just having this thought, like I had already hired a nanny and trained her during my leave so that I could go back to work. And that wasn't working out. And then I remember like a month before I was supposed to come back, I was like, can I have a talk to my manager? And I was like, I'm sorry, like, I just can't do this. And they were so supportive. They were like, you can run home, because I live 15 minutes away from the Jersey City office, and nurse your child and come back. And I was like, well, that's a thought. But my anxiety was through the roof at that point, and nothing you told me could have convinced me to go back to work at that juncture. So, so I took a 2.5-year hiatus and with my first, and then ended up going back.
And while like I think that was like such a thoughtful thing for them to do, to offer that to you. But then I just think about the logistics of it. I was like, wait a minute. So I have to stop working, pack up, drive home 15 minutes, feed the baby, which is going to take, probably 30 or so minutes. Then I have to like go back. So that's an hour. And I'm probably going to do that at least 1 or 2 other times during the day.
Yeah.
Like, how is this going to work?
Yeah, so that was my thought process. Exactly. I see Jen unmuting. So if you want to hop in, Jen.
Sorry, I'm muting because of the noise of the renovations happening right below me. But it's funny. So Sarah, that was the LinkedIn post that you put up about that was how I first found you, and I first followed you. And that's probably at least a year ago, if not more, because I was at Chubb with my first daughter, 2012, kind of like the same thing, our parallel life stories. And my daughter would not take a bottle. And so I had to drive every 3 hours to daycare to feed her and then go back to work, because it was the only thing that we could do. And my manager was so supportive of it. She was a mom of 2, and her kids were probably 10 years older, at least, than my kids. But she's like, you do what you need to do. You leave when you need to leave, and we'll figure everything else out later. And it's just like having that support and knowing that the support is there just makes such a difference.
Such a difference. Yeah, it wasn't enough to convince me to go back, but it was enough to convince me to go back to that company and work for like the same team. Not exactly the same team, but to go back. Also did not take the bottle. I remember being like, babe, we got, to my husband, we have to prepare for me to go back. And he would practice a bottle feeding, and we tried every bottle nipple possible, known to man and woman, right? And my Colette, she was stubborn then, she's stubborn now. And she made him walk the halls, I remember, of our apartment for 1 hour, and she maybe took 1 ounce of breast milk. And he was like, he came back sweating. He's like, I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. And with your first, everything feels overwhelming, and everything seems like a big deal. Now that I have 3, I was like, with my second, I was like, oh, he's good. Like, but he did suck down the bottle like very quickly. But you don't feel as nervous, because that they're going to get their nutrition either at night, or like they're just going to get hungry at some point and just eat.
Yeah.
And at what point did you decide, like, I'm ready to go back to work, or how did this happen? Yeah.
Oh boy, that's a loaded question, Jen. My husband won't watch this. It's okay. So,
or will he? I don't know.
I'm a stay-at-home mom, right? I'm a perfectionist stay-at-home mom, because this is my first kid. She has her allergies, her food allergies, her skin allergies. So I'm hyper aware of everything that she's doing. If there's like a slight scratch to the skin, I'm like all over it. That gets really, really tiring really fast. And my wonderful husband, he's going to work, he's making the dough, he's coming home, he's saying hi to the baby, and his life is like it was, for the last 10 years of, 15 years of his career. And I grew so resentful. I was like, well, I'm doing all of this. Like, can you pick up, the housework or whatever? And I remember being so perfectionist that as soon as he came to the door at 7 p.m., I would be like, throw off your clothes. You're like dirty from New York. This baby has allergies, so you can't touch her until you've taken a shower. And, her bath time was 7:30. So it was like, everything had to be like clockwork. And he was like, what is your deal? Like, why are you so stressed? And the imbalance that happened in our marriage is what pushed me to go back to work, because I said to myself, I can't see myself living like this as a stay-at-home mom and doing that, the children, all the childcare, all the housework, and being happy. I wasn't happy. So as much as it's a blessing to stay at home and take care of your kids, it's not, you don't get time to unplug. So your partner really has to like be cognizant of that. And what do we know? You have your first kid, like you're still a baby yourself, so that's really what the imbalance, the power imbalance between me and my husband got so bad that I like ran. I like ran to go back to work. Yeah. And I appreciate that because I appreciate work now,
Yeah. So if I'm following, so you went back though before you had your other two.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So how was the transition then when you're like, I'm assuming it was easier because it was easier for me, with the second, it just like, as you said, like things aren't as hard, but it's still a lot more to juggle. So how was that being back full? Were you back full time?
Yeah, full time. And I was living in Jersey City, but my job was in New York City. So I was commuting, luckily on the ferry. And I found a wonderful nanny. Mm-hmm. I could not have returned to work without my nanny. My entire paycheck basically went to her. But as you know, I was desperate to like have some semblance of my older self, which was, you have financial means, you have time to yourself. You're not, just a mom all the time. And so I found great childcare. It was expensive, but my rationale was I'll continue to make more money. Mm-hmm. But if I bow out of the workforce now, and if I try to return in 10 years, it's going to be a lot harder. And I think there's some statistic where it's like you lose maybe like 20 or 40,000 a year, like of earning power. So over the course of 10 years, I would have lost like, I don't know, I'm just making this number up, but hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And in 401k contributions and just salary. So and my husband took on a lot more. So like I used to do all the pickups and drop offs and whatnot. Now we had to divide and conquer. And he wasn't used to that. And that was a difficult transition for him. But when you have two kids, the one who wasn't doing everything now has to equally contribute. So like I joke around with him all the time. And I'm like, with every kid, we've gained more and more, balance in our marriage. And he's fantastic now. Like I've trained him like so well, like it's not natural. It's not natural, but that's the only way I made it work is delegating and having more people help with not, and I don't want to say the word help, but also, take on all the childcare and household chores.
Yeah, I felt like that was always a challenge too. Because I don't know when they were, and I did not have a nanny. We had a really good daycare, and it was really close to my house, and that was helpful. And my job was a little more flexible, or I kind of just made it flexible, because it was like, well, you don't know where I could be at a client meeting, I could be at a deposition, or I could be working from home. You don't know. But I think with the two, it definitely got harder because it was just harder to get out the door. I mean, you guys know, it's just like, and you have a third, both of you. So it's that just that much harder to make it all work. But then I think you just are a little more relaxed with the others after the first though too. Because
Right.
I remember like the going to daycare for the first time with my first, I remember I had like schedules and I had like yeah, it was like she eats at this time, she naps at this time.
Toilet seat covers and
Yeah.
hand soap and lotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now it's funny because she's like my least scheduled one. Like she's the one that's all over the place.
It's really hard to keep that balance though. Like once you let go, it's like, oh, it's hard to get back into it. But
it is. And I think by nature, a lot of people who go to law school have a specific like type A personality and like to have control over everything. And so that just translates into other things in your life.
right.
So I kind of felt the same way, that I tried to stay at home, and I usually lasted about 6 months before I was like, no, I have to go back to work. And because you need to keep that same sort of like organization and structure over other parts of your life. But when I'm working, the rest of it, I mean, it has to kind of fall by the wayside and just be a hot mess, because you can't do it all. You can't do it all at the same time.
No, you can't.
So okay, so then you go back to work, you have this fabulous nanny, you're able to like dive right back in, you strike a balance. But with that, have you found that like as you're moving up now in the ranks and you're more in a managerial position, like were you more cognizant of like the support you got to make sure you extend that support to people who are like other women and young parents who are going through what you had gone through not that long before?
Yes, 100%, 100%, because as a society, we don't value what moms do. I joke around with my husband, because every task that's done in the house, and even, your pregnancy itself, right? Like you can put a number on that, right? Like if you're going to do IVF and have a surrogate, somebody to carry your baby, it's $150,000. So I tell him, I'm like, listen, I have $1 million womb. Like, like you're so lucky. Like I have $1 million womb that I just, but it seems kind of odd to say it. And I don't say it in order to seem like, oh, well, I've done all this. Cause
Yeah.
it's not like a tit for tat, but it's just calling attention to the fact that if you were to dole out what a mom does or a dad, to a housekeeper or to a cleaner or to a nanny, like it's going to be worth at least $250,000 a year. So if you're doing it on top of your full-time job, it is valuable. And I think society doesn't see what women do as valuable. It's like, we need to have children. Who's going to pay? We're not going to have Social Security by the time we're ready for it. But who's going to keep the jobs going and this economy going? It's our children who grow up, right? So this notion of, oh, well, you decided to have kids, so that's your problem. It's not an individual problem. This is a societal problem. It's a systemic problem. So I'm all for, paid leave, letting moms bond, parents, dads, whatever your caregiving status is, with their little ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also just having the support when you return, to have that flexibility. Like I know for myself, I had the flexibility because I made it. I wasn't asking for the flexibility. I would be asking for forgiveness if I ever got found out with said flexibility, but I just tried to run under the radar because I knew where I was. If I had asked, they'd probably say no. So I was like, well, I'm just going to do it and still do my job and then see what happens. And it did work out.
I love that you say that, Megan, because I did the same thing with my second. Like you asked, how did you do it with the two? My nanny would bring Elijah, the second one, to New York and basically stay from 8 to 3 until she had to pick up, the older one from school. And I would run out anytime he was like, oh, he's stirring from his nap, I would run out and breastfeed him. And, you know, like, you're supposed to be pumping. I'm like, what's the difference if I'm in a pumping room pumping, or if it's, you know, right directly into the baby's mouth? Like, what's the difference?
Right.
The time is the same. And I didn't necessarily say that I was doing that. And like you, I kind of pushed the boundaries on that because it didn't make any sense to like not do that for me.
Yeah.
And it's still, I think, taboo to talk about these issues in the workplace, especially if, you know, it doesn't even matter if it's male dominated up top. It's just the system that doesn't allow women to freely talk about this and acknowledge it. But breastfeeding is like a huge commitment. It's a full-time job on itself, at least for the first year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will say, like, I didn't breastfeed, and I mean, I didn't breastfeed for a number of reasons, but one of them being, I was like, I don't know how I'm logistically going to be able to do this.
Right.
Like,
right.
like in my head, I'm like, people just walk into my office whenever they feel like. I'm like, and I work with a lot of dudes, and that just would be weird. And I was like, this just, for a variety of reasons, this is just not for me.
Yeah.
But I applaud everyone who did it. I knew I was going to be an extra added stress that I knew I was not equipped for.
And I think it could also be the difference too of working for a firm versus insurance company or wherever you're working. I remember when I was breastfeeding, I think my third, and I was still working at Chubb, and I went to a mediation. And the defense counsel who was with me was also breastfeeding. And she was so nervous all day. Am I going to get a break? Do you think they're going to give me a break to breastfeed? And I didn't tell her that I had to pump too. And then she's like, you know, I pulled out my little bag and she's like, you're pumping too? I was like, yeah, we're going to tell them we need a break and we're going to go pump. Like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And it could also be kind of like we were talking, the difference between your first and your third, because by the time you have your third, you're like whipping out the pump in the middle of anywhere, like, what am I going to do? But it just depends on your employer, you know, and how supportive they are. And I just always, and I had all three of my kids working at Chubb, and they were just always so supportive of all of it.
Yeah. I 100% agree. And look, it's the law. You got to give, you know, breastfeeding, whatever it might be, expressing or breastfeeding or whatever. In New York now, you have to give those breaks. And so I think the more awareness we provide, you know, like talks like this, the more women will feel emboldened to be like, oh no, like this isn't something that I need to like hide, because it's so natural. Like, what else are you supposed to? You have to feed your baby, you know?
Right. Although I did find that I remember when I was pregnant with my first, for some reason, some of the people I work with felt like it was they had permission then to talk about things with my body because I was pregnant. Like, and I was like, this is not appropriate. Like, like
rubbing the belly.
I was like, in what world is it okay to talk about how big I am?
Oh my God.
You know, about nipple covers. Like, why in any world do you think this is the right time and place to raise these topics?
And this segue right into an employment discussion.
Yes. Yes. So So you move on though. Like you were at Chubb for a number of years. And at what time did you decide to depart from a carrier and move over to a broker?
That was pretty recent. It was like within the past year. And I was handling claims for about 15 years and was asked, this was a pivotal moment in my like career trajectory. I was asked to be a speaker on a DEI panel at the Plus conference in 2020. So it's virtual. And, you know, before the session actually launched or was recorded, you know, there were about 4 of us in the group. We had a couple sessions where we were practicing, rehearsing, whatever. And the first two get-togethers was very formal, and we were talking about, like the legalities of DEI and things like that. And then at a moment in time, one of us just broke down and was like, really, really like, this is what's actually going on in my life, and then the floodgates open, and we're all sharing like our stories of, let's say it was, discrimination, or for, nursing, or, the color of our skin. And so that lit a fire in me that I was like, I didn't think I had this fire anymore. And I wanted to do a different career at that point. And so I was asked by the chief culture officer at Chubb to be on her team, and I gladly accepted. It was a tough transition, like in terms of going from an individual contributor role as a claims adjuster to now you're thrown into the politics, right, of a huge corporation. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't navigate it as well as I could have. And, I don't regret any of it. I love what I learned from that, because I can share those stories and help others like navigate situations at work that may be difficult that I had already experienced. And I was like, what do I really like? Like, I like doing DEI work, but maybe it's not going to be my full-time job. Maybe it's something I do on the side. Mm-hmm. And I have a technical claims background, but I don't want to handle claims anymore, because that life is, you get pummeled with claims. Like, there's just so many every day, you're getting like, there was one day where I got 7 claims in one day, and I was like,
oh my gosh,
so like, and I was in EPL, and already the volume of those types of claims is high. So my friend, and this is why you need to talk to your friends, because they can give you ideas and insights that you might not even be aware of. And she was like, listen, why don't you check out Woodruff Sawyer? She had been there, found it fantastic in terms of supporting parents. Did you hear that scream from my son?
It just makes me smile. I just love hearing the shared chaos that everyone has.
And it's a San Francisco, headquarters. So like, the mornings are a little bit more flexible, and then you work, at night. And I was like, this could work out. And luckily there was like one spot open, and I reached out through a friend, and immediately got connected with actually the person who I also worked with when I was on the claims adjuster side. My boss was on the broker claim side, and we had worked on plenty of cases together. So like within a week I had an offer, and within like 3 weeks I was starting there. So like everything fell into place very quickly. And I really attribute it to my relationships. Like, you got to talk, and you got to like make sure that your ears to the ground, even if you're not looking for anything. Just casually say, what do you think about your company? Like, what's the culture like at your company, and really just get a sense. And now that I'm on the broker side, I really get a sense of like all the carriers now, because I'm dealing with adjusters from every company, and you could just tell which cultures are a little more rigid and which ones are a little more flexible. So
yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up. And I'm not going to ask you to name any specific carriers by any stretch of the imagination, but I guess with that, have you noticed or taken note into just like how different carriers handle claims or how they approach their processes? And with that, like, what are some glaring differences that you see? Again, I don't want you to like talk specifics about any specific companies, but generally, what are some differences that you see of how carriers deal with claims and stuff?
So the systems in place are evident when when I was at Chubb, there was a rule within 48 hours you have to have called the insured. You can't just write an email. You got to call them, leave a voicemail if they're not available. And I really actually love that because it forces you to connect verbally, live with somebody versus like a pre-template email that you send with all the questions. And it's evident which companies don't have processes in place because it's all over the place. Like some adjusters might contact you, some adjusters might not contact the client and you have to chase them down. Or some companies, they'll just send you a template of questions and there's no oh, well, this is a relevant question to this scenario, no tailored email. It's just copy and paste, and so and some carriers that I actually have never heard of, in the cyber world, where the customer service is impeccable. I'm I just want you to be my friend now because you made the client feel wonderful. And and then they're talking about hobbies, beyond what a claims adjuster does, right? Talk about claims, but also making them feel like we really care about who you are as a person. And now we have a relationship. So it's the whole gamut. You get and then I really appreciate kind of the, because whether you're experienced or not, the human interaction is based on empathy and based on I want to find coverage for you. It's not, I'm going to see where I can deny this. Right. So you definitely feel a difference between carriers, where some carriers are I'm going to fight you tooth and nail. Even if this should be covered, I'm going to fight you tooth and nail because that's what the policy language says.
Yeah. Well, and I've definitely found from speaking to a lot of people in claims industry is that, there is a general push to have the narrative change to we're here to try to help and find you coverage, not we're here to disclaim coverage. Because right. I think overall the insurance industry there's this idea that it's exactly that, we don't want to pay you any of the money. Yeah. And I have yet to speak to anybody in claims that shares that feeling. It's in fact exactly how you're saying is we want to help our insureds. We want to, find coverage in the sense that there's a coverage issue, or if there's just a claim, we want to pay where it makes sense to pay, and we want to pay what makes sense,
right?
Rather than we just don't want to pay anybody anything. And I just feel like there's a general we want to change the shift the look of the insurance industry, that it's not we don't want to cover, we don't want to pay, it's not the general sentiment that I'm getting when I'm talking to people.
Yeah, the best claims adjusters are the ones who are able to explain why something is covered and why something is not. And when they explain the stuff that's not covered, they do it in a gentle manner, in a way that they're I really wish that this wasn't the case, but this policy language exists, and unfortunately that's going to impact, but maybe we can find coverage somewhere else. It goes a long way. And sometimes insureds who are sophisticated will understand that and just be able to go on to the next scenario. And sometimes the small businesses, they need a lot of hand holding. And I want everyone to feel you can simplify policy language so that it's not a mystery. And Jen, you had a great post about this, about your tree and coverage.
Yeah,
Can you talk a little about that, because I love that.
Yeah. So 2 weeks ago, a tree fell onto my house.
Super.
It was fine, and it shattered a skylight. Of course, it falls right onto the sunroom, the one room where there's one skylight, and the glass is all over the place. And that's the first time that I have ever, thank goodness, ever had to file a claim. And it's just interesting to be on the other side, right? And I know how to read a policy. I should know what's in my policy. And the adjuster comes out to the house and he's like, oh yeah, it's $500 to remove the tree. And I'm like, $500? I can't remove a tree that's sitting on my house for $500. And the one thing that he did say to me when I told him I worked in insurance, and the adjuster said, oh, so are you the first person this week who's not going to yell at me? And I said, well, yes, because like, I understand. Okay, that's what the policy says. The policy gives me $500 for the tree. Like, me yelling at the adjuster is not going to change that. That's the policy that I bought. Right.
Yeah.
So the poor guy, but but it just is interesting to be on the other side. Like, it's kind of like when the doctor becomes a patient, right?
Yes.
Like, you kind of get to see things from the other person's perspective.
Right.
But also, like, policies aren't easy, right? Like, I mean, like, and so I think having that adjuster who explains in everyday language what's covered and what's not, or why things aren't covered, is very important, because I think the average individual who's unfamiliar with insurance policies is not going to be able to pick up their policy and understand. I mean, there's a reason why there are full coverage departments to law firms. You know, like, this is very confusing stuff and very technical, and it's hard. It's not easy. So I think that aspect is really, really important, because the average person just isn't going to know, and they're not going to understand. These aren't normal terms either, and they're weird.
Yes.
A lot of times they're so weird and defined oddly. And
Yeah, and I think
go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah. And I think that's why people dislike insurance, right? Because it can be so complicated, and you feel like you're being duped or something.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And kind of like you, I spent most of my time doing EPL claims, like professional liability. I did a little bit of GL, but I never did property. But because of being a lawyer, I've handled some property stuff. So like, I understand the difference of like actual cash value versus replacement value. But that's kind of a difficult concept, and people don't understand that, and people don't want to understand that. Right. And so it's just it's a very interesting world with a lot of alphabet soup, that unless you have spent time doing it, the average person is just not going to know. And why would they know?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like insurance companies are getting a little savvier with selling insurance, like making it more friendly for like, especially like Gen Z. Like, if you're getting pet insurance, like, you could just click 5 buttons and then it's like, here's a policy, you know, and here's a price. And there's a lot more technology out there, I think, that helps translate all that confusing stuff. But definitely hire a broker that you trust, who's able to tell you what the policy says, and make sure that all all risks are accounted for, right? And that's what Woodruff does.
Yeah. So, but, moving into like the broker role, or, working at a broker, so just so I understand your role correctly too, because a lot of brokers have people in this claim consultant role, almost like you are there also to assist the insured and almost act as a conduit between the carrier and the insured, to help kind of the claims process go a little more smoothly, and kind of explain some of the things and make it so that insured feels like their interests are being protected. Am I like defining or describing
100%
accurately?
Yeah, it's 100% what we do. And it's so I'm on the management liability team. So that's D&O, EPL, E&O, cyber's included in E&O, crime, fiduciary, coverages that I've never actually handled a claim in, like crime, like who's handled a crime claim? But it's opened it's opened my world of policies, where I'm now seeing, if I get like an EPL complaint, right? It's not just purely EPL. Like, there might be like a privacy component. Maybe it's like, someone's HIPAA's information was, leaked or breached. And that will perhaps sometimes, if it's pled correctly, trigger cyber coverage under invasion of privacy. And so, like, these are aspects of coverage that I never had to really worry about, because at Chubb, at least, you're in your silo of EPL claims. And if there was a cyber component, then you would have a cyber adjuster work in tandem with you, versus one person kind of knowing what all coverages apply. So it's great. And yes, I'm in an advising, consulting, and helping clients know which policies this, trigger document might fall under. And so it might be different policy periods. It might be in the tail policy. It might be in 3 different policies. And then also explaining what are their obligations and what are their rights under the policy, and making sure that they're getting every cent that they're owed.
And with that, where are you seeing any trends or any rise of, different or new claims that like you hadn't, I mean, I know you mentioned the crime policies, but outside of that, like you seeing some trends within the industry that you're seeing a rise of certain types of claims?
So there's a lot of cyber attacks going on. A lot of companies that don't have the multi-factor authentication, and just a world that I wasn't quite, aware of. But now that I'm on the broker side, I'm like, wow, like cyber claims are really big right now, and they could do a lot of damage. And so make sure your IT, they know what they're doing. That's a big one. In the EPL world, I mean, claims are just getting more expensive. The emotion
can attest to that.
It's like there might not even be validity to the facts, but your emotional distress damages could be garden variety of 100,000. And it's accepted, in jurisdictions like California. So everything's kind of on the rise. I think like nuclear verdicts are on the rise, and everything's getting riskier and more expensive.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that's definitely across the board too. I speak from like just yesterday I was at in Ocean County, New Jersey, and talking to the judge there, and he was like, yeah, on Friday, he's like, we had like, I don't know the exact number, but it was like $4.5 million verdict. And he was like, here. He's like, this isn't even Philadelphia. He's like, it is just getting outrageous. And he explained more of the case, and I honestly, he lost me a little. It was very complicated, and I was like, okay, this sounds very confusing. But it had something to do with property rights and this and that. But I was just struck by the number, and he was just like, look, it is getting difficult out there and everywhere, and even in counties and jurisdictions that you are typically you're not seeing those types of numbers put on the board. So yeah, it gets expensive. And I like that you mentioned cyber though too, because we've had a number of cyber people on, and I love listening to the cyber stuff because first of all, it's just fascinating. It's like this dark web of, I forget how they refer to them, as like cyber perpetrators or something. And I'm like, they had like all these ransom calls and they have to pay them. Like, this is like,
right.
It's like the wild, wild west in digital form.
Right. In digital form. Right. All these smart people just, able to make money off of their smartness. Like,
right. But what comes up a lot during these conversations is the importance of having the cyber coverage, especially for like smaller businesses that might not have these sophisticated models that definitely need this type of insurance and to kind of increase their protection, because they are the ones that can really get hit the hardest and have their business interruption be more significant to like their bottom line.
Right. My husband always makes fun of me because he's like, I can guess your passwords. Like, I know like what your passwords are going to be. And I'm like, he's like, use something that's more complicated. And I'm like, oh,
but then I won't remember.
And you can't save things on your phone because what if your phone gets hacked? So it's like good old, like, I think there are apps and stuff that you can like secure lock, and people have given me advice. Yeah, Jen, if you want to share which one you use.
Yeah, no, my husband's a big like check kind of guy, and so we use LastPass, and so everything is the dual authentication, if I'm saying that correctly, and your password, thumbprint, the whole thing. He has everything kind of locked up with crazy passwords. But it's funny because you talk about like these ransom attacks and the people who were saying, you know, I won't release it unless you give me money. Like, I feel like half of EPL claims are essentially a ransom attack. People got fired and are like, give me $20,000 or I'm going to sue you. I mean, but it's just, it's nuts. It's all crazy out there. And I don't know, Sarah, from when you started handling EPL claims around the same time I did, a nuisance value settlement used to be like $2,500 or $5,000. And now it's like $30,000.
Yeah. Now that better be your first offer at mediation.
Oh, sorry, I never said that. I was just using an example. But it's just crazy. It is just everything. I mean, everything has just gone through the roof. I remember after I took a break and for a little bit with my kids and came back and I learned what the settlements had come. It was just, I couldn't believe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think especially in the last few years, it's gotten a lot worse. And I don't know. I think it has to do with a lot of things. I think inflation has a lot to do with cost of living. Like, you know, just everything costs more in life. But then also you see these nuclear verdicts out there. So I think, you know, the public thinks, okay, like these are normal numbers. So everyone's kind of looking for their numbers, I think, because it's out there everywhere. And they see like, oh, well, so-and-so got 1 point blah, blah billion, you know.
And I think when I first started too, a typical plaintiff's attorney's fee was 30%, and now it's 40% in the arena. So, I mean, that makes a difference too, as the number goes up, because now the attorney's getting a larger cut. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And with e-discovery and all of the fancy stuff that goes on at trial and all of the costs associated as well, that definitely adds on to bolster everything.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Mediation is a great route.
Yes, but even that gets expensive. Like, I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense, but I mean, even just those expenses have gone up so much. So, I mean, look, all the prices of everything are rising across the board. So I guess it's a rising tide, so to speak. So we all have to rise with it. But it's like a little hard to swallow sometimes.
Mm-hmm. That's why I know before we started, Meghan was talking about getting her kids Wawa for lunch. I mean, that's why a good Wawa hoagie will never go out of style, because, you know, it's $5 during Hoagie Fest.
It
was those places when I was in law school.
I know. And if you get the points every so often, that hoagie's going to be free. So, you know, Sarah, what pitfalls though do you see, you know, when you're talking to some of your insureds and in your role, what some pitfalls are you seeing that on their end, like that like you're saying they need help with certain coverages, or, you know, they have questions, or they're struggling. You know, I'm sure you're seeing that, you know, in your position, you're seeing where your insureds are having issues.
Yeah, a lot of times it just boils down to communication. Mm-hmm. There's too many stakeholders and not a good line of communication. And so something that should have been noticed maybe a year ago, if it's a claims made and reported policy, mm-hmm. is now coming to our desk, and you say, oh, well, like, we'll try to get coverage for this, but it's outside of the notice requirements. I think having good systems in place, processes, with knowing who is going to, you know, first of all, if something comes in the mail, what is a front desk going to do with it? Are they, you know, because we've had stuff that, you know, and maybe not at Woodruff, but like when I was a carrier, they're like, well, it just sat with the admin for like a month. And so knowing mm-hmm. exactly what to do and to know what's your lane, what's the next step, and who needs to be, you know, who's the right person to bring this to. I think communication is huge. Like, a lot of companies will, I think it's a great quote. You guys probably know it. It's like, you rise to the level of it's basically like, if you have systems in place, like, things will not get missed. But if you do not have systems in place, then things will fall through the cracks. Yes. And then it becomes a blame game. And so avoid the blame game and just mm-hmm. communicate. Like, you need good leadership who says this is how it's done, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you need accountability. So like, I'm a fan of copying everybody to that email. Like, I don't care if you're going to feel like, oh, well, why isn't she coming to me first? And then, like, there are certain situations where you do need to have private conversations and then bring everyone together. But if it's something that needs to move quickly, just throw everybody in that email and get it done and out the door, because otherwise, it sits in someone's inbox or literally on someone's desk and it doesn't get notified. So yeah. So I think systems, knowing, like, when you sit down with your broker, like, understand what, like, right now we're making one for one of our clients where we have every single policy, the notice provision from that policy, including endorsements. So like, they know if they are like the human resource officer or, the CEO or the risk officer, they know that they have 90 days, after the policy expired to send this in. So there's no confusion as to what the policy says. Like we said before, policy language is really confusing. So simplifying that process is huge. And bullet pointing, what's covered, what's not, like, and just making it simple. Like, I love Excel spreadsheets. So I think that's, Meghan, to answer your question, full circle, just simplify it and make it easy to understand, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I'm a fan of having standard operating procedures.
That's right.
They make it's like, although I'm not a fan of having standard operating procedures when handling files, or, because everything is different, but like, as to like, okay, you get these are the next steps that you need to do. You get a claim across your desk. These are the next step you need to do. See, now we are having some fighting outside my door right now. I had to do a snap. Oh man,
Megan's got a lot of power, though. If I snapped at my kids, they would just ignore it. Like,
they're ignoring it, but I'm like trying to shut them up. Like, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. That derailed me. Well, and actually, we are like pretty much out of time. But Sarah, I don't want to close this up without asking you this, because you've had a lot of bobs and weaves in your career, but you keep moving. You keep moving on up. But looking back to younger Sarah, what advice would you give your younger self?
Okay, I heard this from a leader that I really liked. I'm going to steal it from him. Sometimes you're so busy cutting the lawn with scissors and like focusing on the small, like the small area right in front of you, that you forget to look up and see the big picture. And so I think it's great. Like, when you're in your 20s, work hard, make a name for yourself as someone who gets stuff done on time and done well. But at a certain point in your career, you have to say, this is actually not enough. And I think a lot of women feel that around their like upper 30s, early 40s. They realize like all the hard work that they're putting in, it's not getting them promoted. It's not getting them visibility. So if there are ways to make yourself more visible, like, even if it's like forwarding a kudos email that you got from a client saying thank you, forward that to your supervisor and just let them know like you're doing a good job, and just like little way. Don't feel shy about giving yourself the credit, because no one's going to do it for you. Like, no one's going to tell you, Sarah, you've been doing such a great job. Here's $20,000. Like, no one's going to do that. You have to find where you can kind of find yourself a sponsor or a mentor, somebody who's already done this before, and ask them like, what is your perception of me? Like, what's my brand to you? Like, how do you perceive me? And then figure out, like, do the work that you need to do. Woodruff has great benefits. So one of the benefits is a career coach. So I meet with her like, once a month, I try to do it more often, and I bounce ideas off of her, and she has great insights, and every insight she has, I take and then I use it, right? So like everybody needs some kind of mentor, sponsor, coach, somebody who's always giving you like the real deal versus like, oh no, you're fine. Like you'll get promoted in, a year or two, and then that never happening.
Right. That's a great resource.
Oh, we have like awesome resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's such great advice. I mean, I even find with my daughters who are 9 and 11 that anytime any of them or their friends says something positive about themselves, they're like, I, got champion at the horse show this weekend, or my basketball team, we won the game. The other kids said it's bragging. And I said, it's not bragging for you to share your successes with your friends and your people around you. Like that's what, there's a line,
Sure.
But we want to celebrate everybody. We don't want people to not tell everyone else about their accomplishments because they don't want to make somebody else feel bad.
That's exactly right.
And so I really like that advice.
And you should be proud of your accomplishments.
Yes.
And you should be, I mean, should they be going on and on and on and on about it? Probably not. But what did you do this weekend? Oh, I got first place. Awesome. I got second, whatever it is. Like you should be celebrating yourself and be proud of your accomplishments.
Right.
And for in the same token, don't blow out someone else's candle too when they're celebrating their own.
Right. Exactly.
Yes. And I think it's so important that we're teaching that to our daughters, while they're still young, because I do think that we like to kind of dull our own shine and it just keeps getting duller and duller and duller. And then you, like I said, you get happy and you're just like, wait a minute, what happened? What did I do? And you want to tell your younger self, like, celebrate it,
Yeah. And it's really important to like not let that light burn out, because you can do, the higher up you go, the more of a Shark Tank it becomes. Right. And so you need to be able to navigate that Shark Tank, but also know when here's a quote that I really like, you don't think of it as you're running away from the situation. Think of it as you're running towards something greater. It's about the energy. It's the same direction, but the energy and the thought that you're putting into. So, I feel like we can talk for like another hour.
I know. Totally could. And maybe we can in another, we could do a part 2. But for now, for all our listeners, well, first of all, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. And I do think we should, maybe have a part 2 of this discussion, because I think we could go on forever about, raising everyone up and shining bright lights and mentorship and, guiding daughters to be strong, independent women in their futures. Right. But of course, to all our listeners out there, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to Claims Never Sleep. You can find us on your favorite streaming platform. You can also find us on YouTube at Claims Never Sleep Podcast. And thanks again for tuning in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep Podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Meghan Henry.